Star Wars is not where it used to be. As these projects continue to happen, more and more people are starting to have a bitter taste for the brand. The Acolyte isn't being received very well. Why is that the case? It really boils down to who is behind it and how it is being marketed. Nobody can really determine how the show is until all of the episodes has been released. But from what some people were talking about, the show will reform the lore. Stuff like this is why people who are passionate about Star Wars have such a disdain for Disney's Star Wars. The rift cannot be any larger. And sadly, as time goes on, there will be more of Disney Star Wars than George Lucas's Star Wars. Even though many people say that Star Wars is dead, it's not dead. It's just some hollowed out science fiction project that many people will consider an abomination. Ultimately, everybody have their different view on Star Wars. But now we are having a mass public shootdown of the Acolyte. So this must be considered one of the worst takes on this franchise. For what we know of Star Wars for the longest, will it all be just ruined? What about George Lucas? Well, George Lucas backed Bob Iger, but this should be taken as a message to finally just let this franchise go. The ship has been sinking for a long time. Just abandon it. George Lucas has been getting a good deal out of Star Wars even after Disney has bought it. Yes, I think it is true that George Lucas didn't like that Disney didn't use his sequel trilogy ideas, but he knew of the company he was selling it to. He gets benefits from Disney Star Wars even after he had sold it, and a lot of people miss this fact. Here's the thing. He figured that Disney will continue to commercialize the brand well after he has passed. Disney is a media giant. Before 2012, many people didn't doubt Disney handling this property. I know it is different today, but not back then. Only a few doubted Disney. The man is now 80 years old. Fans were hoping that he would step in and speak against Disney on how it handles Star Wars. That falls on Kathleen Kennedy and the people she oversees. I believe it is best to look at George Lucas backing Bob Iger as a sign to move on. He was thinking at the terms of business. I think he figured that even though Disney is doing all this, at least the company will continue to commercialize Star Wars. And unless there's some mass upheaval, Star Wars will continue to belong to Disney. I think many people will have suspect those who grew up on the original trilogy especially to have moved on with their lives. And probably even some who grew up with the prequels. If you don't like it, just move on. My gosh, people who just picking at Disney, it's not going to really do much. Bad publicity is any publicity. Unless you monetize in your videos, I guess it is efficient to scrutinize and monetize. Star Wars hate is as profitable as Star Wars love. I'm not shilling for Disney, by the way. All I'm saying is for those who still hung on Star Wars to just move on. The ship will continue to sink. It sucks to see what Star Wars has become, to see Boba Fett become something less of himself in his own TV show, to see what happened in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, changing the lore between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, especially A New Hope. Funny how Disney wants to praise the originals more than the prequels, even though what they have done with their canon has hurt the originals more than the prequels. It sucks, but I can't complain about everything that Disney does. When I see them adding some color letter people, if you understand what I'm talking about, into Star Wars, it's like, whatever. I just can't go around complaining about everything. It's just bitter of what they're doing. It's almost like they're sabotaging what has came before, almost on purpose. But I suspect such stuff is being added to media today because I know what Hollywood is all about. I have this sort of black pill about today's media. But hey, just move on and create your own media or look to other markets around the world. Good content is there. You don't need Hollywood. Disney will not kill Star Wars. They don't want to kill Star Wars. It's just in a state that it's not really alive and it's not dead. And people suspect Andor to save it, and people praise Andor too much. Andor is not going to save Star Wars. The only thing that might save Star Wars is betrayal. There should be a mass abandonment of the property through apathy. Once Disney can no longer profit off of Star Wars, they will retire it. And after a long period of time, people might start to miss it, thus increasing its chance of being profitable again. And hopefully by that time in the future, the people who are behind the bad decision making would all have gone on to do something else with their lives. Apathy is the real killer of franchises. Transformers Revenge of the Fallen was hated by critics, but it made a lot of money. And thus, 2 years later, Dark of the Moon was released, a better movie that made even more money. When The Last Knight made much less money than Age of Extinction, Paramount halted production of any more sequels, even though Bumblebee 2018 was going to be released the following year because it was already in production. Money talks way more than criticism. I know critics can influence the direction of a film, but it is ultimately up to the audience to make the final decision. If the mass majority turn their backs on a franchise, it's doomed. And if that could happen to Star Wars, then Disney would likely leave it alone and retire it. Afterwards, for starters, there might not be any more lore to be altered to disgusting lengths. I wish it could just rest forever, but I highly doubt that. With Disney, it might never retire, but if you let it rest, it might be profitable in the future. But Disney wants to make money now with the brand. Within 5 years, there have been 5 movies. It had to take the flop of Solo for Disney to stop trying to make all those movies. But they were excessively milking the franchise. Star Wars was never meant to be like that. It was an event. When George Lucas was doing it, it was every 3 years in a particular time span. 1977 to 1983 and 1999 to 2005. That's a decent time span. And it was an event every 3 years. Now there's something every time you look around. If you're doing that, would you ever have another event like The Phantom Menace or The Force Awakens? How many people want to see Rey? And that is why that Rey movie, if it's ever made, will be treated like an episode 10. They don't want to call it that, but it will be treated as such. It'll be treated like a part of the saga, even though the saga had ended. Because truly there aren't really any more Skywalkers left. The only answer for us to do is to stop picking at it and to abandon it. That will hurt Disney the most. And then they will finally leave this franchise alone. It might still be in their hands, but they will give it rest. The anti-Disney Star Wars fans should not keep playing baseball with Disney. They are trying to strike Disney out like this. The mass apathy will be the great weapon. There will be those who would take anything from Disney. And some of them are truly shills. But some people just don't really care. They just enjoy what comes out. They don't really think about it like that. They're just casual people. And I understand that. But that means if Star Wars was to die out, they wouldn't really care like that. So those casual people are truly neutral. But for those who are passionate about what George Lucas has done, just run away. Move on, so you won't have your impression of Star Wars be altered any further. People like Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy and Leslie Headland are more about sharing their own point of view than continuing what George Lucas was trying to tell. All the silly things that were said by the actors of The Acolyte are evidence that Star Wars is not in the right hands. Abandon the brand. Remember what Yoda said in Revenge of the Sith.
Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.